Welcome to PWS United, a podcast for the Prader-Willi syndrome community, brought to you by PWSA USA. This podcast gives the latest news in research, advocacy, and family support by bringing together staff, volunteers, PWS treatment specialists, biotech and pharmaceutical representatives, caregivers, family members, and individuals with PWS. Our goal is to share education, awareness, and resources with those living with PWS and their supporters. Join us in our mission to enhance the quality of life and empower those affected by Prader-Willi syndrome.
If one really wishes to know how justice is administered in a country, one does not question the policemen, the lawyers, the judges, or the protected members of the middle class. One goes to the unprotected, those precisely who need the law's protection the most, and listens to their testimony. James Baldwin. I bring this quote to this episode as a request. To those families who reside in the marginalized spaces of our society, our intention is to help develop a place where you feel safe and comfortable, where you are witnessed and feel welcome to share your experiences and your stories to the benefit of the entire PWS community. To those families historically represented in the resources, the research, the trials, the documents, the media, I ask that you come to this episode and to this moment we are in, ready to listen. To hear the testimony of families in the PWS community who have previously not had seats at the table. By listening, we can begin to create a shared experience that represents all of our loved ones with PWS and together envision a future where, as Dini Rao says it, there are no more lasts. In this episode, we get to learn about PWSA USA's newly formed Equity Committee and discuss why we need one, who's been missing, and how involving families from marginalized communities is essential to our organization and our humanity. We talk about health equity, the different dimensions of diversity, how and why to have these difficult conversations, and how families can help support equity at home. So joining me in this episode are Tracy Chin, Dini Rao, Ashish Rishi, and Stacy Ward. And to give you a little bit more about our guests before we get into it, we'll tell you that Tracy Chin is a registered nurse working in transitional care. Prior to becoming an RN, she worked and interned at various nonprofits addressing cancer research, houselessness, and LGBTQIA+ rights. While she felt this work was fulfilling, she ultimately decided to return to school and pursue nursing. Since then, she has worked in critical care, primary care, homeless shelters, with the county as a COVID RN navigator, and now in community-based transitional care. Throughout all these positions, Tracy passionately advocates for the deeply marginalized and most vulnerable populations. She employs trauma-informed care along with harm reduction approaches in her work and feels strongly about equity in all its forms. Additionally, Tracy facilitates shadowing opportunities for medical students at her university hospital, allowing them to see the important work being done in the community for these populations. She also conducts regular presentations on social drivers of health and health equity to nursing students. Lastly, Tracy helps organize an intersession on disabilities at the hospital's medical school. In doing so, she proctors, presents on disabilities and navigating complex systems, and is on a panel to share her experience of being a medical parent. Tracy graduated with a BA in sociology and MS in nursing from UCLA. She has a daughter with Prader-Willi syndrome, a husband, a dog, and 2 cats, and she currently resides in Portland, Oregon. Ashish Rishi is the founder and CEO of Unwritten Health and a member of the Scientific Advisory Board for IHI, READI, a Horizon Europe initiative on health equity and research infrastructure. His career has been dedicated to making healthcare more inclusive, not as a moral cause, but as a practical necessity. Because systems that exclude people from their data don't just fail those people, they fail everyone who relies on the decisions that data shapes. His work starts with a question most systems never ask: who isn't in the data? Ashish has spent his career examining how healthcare decisions break, not at the point of failure, but long before it, when the wrong voices shape the evidence, when engagement looks thorough, but isn't. At Unwritten Health, he's building something to change that, turning diverse lived experience into decision-ready data that helps life sciences see not just what happened, but where understanding eroded and trust was lost long before outcomes told the story. He doesn't frame this as advocacy. He frames it as an evidence problem, a design problem, one with real consequences for research, innovation, policy, and care delivery. Based in Manchester, UK, Ashish works with healthcare and life sciences organizations who are beginning to ask whether their data truly reflects who it needs to and what it costs when it doesn't. Dini Rao is a community organizer, board member, special needs advocate, and wine entrepreneur. She has served on multiple boards and councils, advising on business strategies and equity plans. For most of her career, Dini has been hosting wine tastings for nearly 30 years. She inspected and sold rare auction wines at Christie's, helped start Amazon's wine department, led in the C-suite at Startup Lot 18, and poured as a sommelier. As a parent of 2 kids, Ione with Prader-Willi syndrome, Dini spends much of her time caregiving and advocating. Seeing a gap in health outcomes for people living with PWS, she created a task force to work with stakeholders on creating better equity and co-founded an affinity group for people of color called Colors of Hope. She aims to use her roles as hostess and organizer, along with her Harvard MBA, to create more justice and joy in the world. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast, or if you know about PWSA, then you know who Stacy Ward is. She is our lovely CEO, but I want to give her some love. Hopefully you all will share this episode around, so maybe there are some new people listening. So just so that you know, Stacy Ward, a longtime leader in the PWS community, has a background rich in nonprofit, behavioral health, education advocacy, and has held multiple successful leadership roles. With 30 years of experience working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and 20 years working with individuals diagnosed with PWS, Stacy brings a variety of skills wherever she goes. She is also an occasional host or co-host for this podcast. So I just want to direct your attention to the show notes for this podcast. There you will find a link to Dini's event, Solidarity and Spice, and you'll learn more about that later. In our show notes, you will also find Dini's email, and that is for those of you who would like to learn more about the Equity Committee. I've also included a few links to books and some other valuable resources that were suggested to support this conversation. So if you're intrigued by this conversation and want a few resources to get started to learn more, you can find those in the show notes. But before we get into this important conversation, I'd like to leave you with one more reflection. And maybe you can save this for after you listen to this episode, write it down in your journal or jot it down on a piece of paper and come back to it after you hear this conversation. This quote is from the poet Andrea Gibson, who passed away last year. And Andrea wrote, "Our insanity is not that we see people who aren't there. It's that we ignore the ones who are." Now, here's a brief thank you from Dini, and then we'll get into it.
And we also want to give a huge thank you to our sponsors of the Solidarity and Spice event, who are directly funding this equity work that we've been talking about. So a very heartfelt thank you to Soleno Therapeutics, Carolyn Welshans, the Venkatraman family, Dr. Satyavani Rao, and Dr. Shaila Garg, who are all Reserve Poor sponsors at the $10,000 level, and to the Seaman Family Foundation for being a $5,000 sponsor at Seller Select. We are truly grateful, and we know our whole community is as well.
I think that it would be great to start with the foundation of what is equity.
I would love to hear Ashish's answer to this because he's a real professional in this field.
I have a very simple definition for health equity, and that is essentially everyone gets access to medication and healthcare at the same time and time point. So, often we've seen disparities on people diagnosed later versus earlier, and so on. So for me, health equity is everyone is on the level playing field. inclusion and all that, that then is very different. There's very different elements to it. But yeah, that's my definition.
Yeah, I love that. And when I think about the PWS community, the biggest thing I want to see is that we don't have any lasts, right? We can't identify a certain community and say, oh, these folks are always last diagnosed, or these ones are
Mm.
the last to get access to care, right? So the
Mm.
day we can say that, I'll say, okay, we can fold up our committee.
So I guess a quick question on that is just wanted people to maybe have a better understanding of what equity is, because I think equality is a word that's thrown around a lot and those are different. Do you mind maybe explaining a little bit about the difference of that?
It's a big topic because there's no not real definition. It's people are using terms interchangeably, inequity, inequality, and so on. But for me, equality is that inclusion piece. So it doesn't matter where you're from, your background, your race, religion, creed, whatever it be, you're still welcomed in that healthcare environment. And that comes maybe more of a top-down approach. So it's in policies and so on. Whereas health equity is more probably baseline on what is the right thing to do. That's how I define it. But it can get very academic. So yeah, I think that's the best definition.
I don't know if you've seen that picture of like three people looking over a fence. Well, equality is when they're all given the same box to stand on and they
Mm.
are still, some of them are at different heights and they can't see over the fence. And equity is when you actually change the size of the box so that everyone is able to look over the fence. And so I always see that when I think of equality versus
That's a good point.
equity. Yeah.
Well, and I think from my perspective, and Dini, maybe you can talk a little bit to this, but I think there's the piece that is healthcare equity, and then there's the service and support equity that is also disparaging right now.
Yeah, exactly. There's a huge disparity that we see. So, I mean, I'll just give you this example. We were in a room of decision makers, people creating policies and things like that for PWSA programs. And folks asked, and, we said, we need to do this specifically for, in this case, is Indigenous community. And they said, well, that doesn't sound fair. That doesn't sound like equality if we do something for that community and not others. And are you suggesting, Dini, that we do it on the color of their skin? And I was like, well, thank you for
Mhm.
asking that question because I have this opportunity now to explain it. And really, it's about like, if we want to create the same outcomes for people, we have to meet everybody where they are. And the truth is that in this country, especially, and Ashish, I'm sure there's a whole different set of circumstances that you find in the UK too. But in this country, we have a history of slavery. We have a history of redlining, where only certain folks could get loans and mortgages for homes in certain areas. And then that created huge disparities in education and income opportunities. And all of these layers of things that hold certain communities back, they were all done on the basis of ethnicity and race and skin color. So now that we have these huge inequalities in folks, you can't say, oh, now we don't, for the solutions, we shouldn't pay attention to skin color, right? Like I hear from people all the time, I don't see skin color. I don't see any differences between people. It's like, well, that's great. But by doing that, you're still going to leave certain people behind because they were behind the starting line in the first place.
If I could just add to that, I think it harkens back to, for me, during the Black Lives Matter movement, when there was the sort of subculture of all lives matter. But what that was doing was actually diminishing the work that needs to be done for certain communities. So I think, yeah, that's really important, what you said there, Dinny.
For listeners of the podcast, Dini was on one of our very first episodes when we talked about the BIPOC affinity group. And I spoke with you and Janelle, and I believe it was Janelle that said, if you don't see color, then you don't see me. Yeah, thank you for that. So before we get any further, I would love to learn a little bit more about Tracy and Ashish. So Tracy, would you like to start and just kind of tell us a little bit about your background, how it motivated you to join this committee?
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, I guess first I'll start with I am a mom to Audra. She's 4 years old and she has Prader-Willi syndrome. Outside of being a mom, professionally, I am a nurse. I've been doing it now for almost 14 years. And out of the 14 years, 12 of them were spent working in basically nonprofits, community based organizations, hospitals. And a lot of the work that I am passionate about is working with very vulnerable populations. So right now I am a transitional care nurse. And what that means is I work with patients who are admitted at the hospital and are needing a lot of assistance transitioning back into the community. So whether they're, Medicaid, uninsured, if they're on the street, houseless, having a substance use disorder, and a ton of medical and psychosocial complexities and disabilities, that's my bread and butter. I I really love working with that population. And so I think just hearing that PWSA is starting this equity committee, I was super honored to be a part of it. And I'm excited for the work ahead. I think making things equitable for everybody and really focusing on the voices that have not been heard in the past, like historically, and just bringing them to the forefront and really showcasing what their lived experience has been and really seating them at the table where decisions are being made and policies are being made and just involving people who are normally not included.
Tracy, can I just say the work that you do is amazing.
Oh,
That's an incredible population to be working about and to be as passionate about. And you can feel that as you're talking.
yeah, I think just in my job, I see how broken the systems are. They are not working for the people who really need them. I think the systems are work for the people who have money and have power. And so, every day it's a constant like running into walls and all those barriers that my patients face. Even as a mom to Audra, like I run into those same, not the exact same barriers, but like the fact that I'm educated and that I work in healthcare and I have the health literacy and all of that. And we're still having issues. Like that speaks volumes to how broken the system is. So, even more reason for me to join this committee.
Ashish, can you tell us more about you and your work?
Yeah, so if I could just start by a little personal element. So th- start my whole this whole journey in health equity started for me when I was a young lad years ago now. But my father had lots of symptomologies that we would be concerned about in this room: losing weight, pain, fatigue, and he was my age actually at the time. He was 46, 47. He would often go to his primary care physicians, his GP, and get dismissed essentially. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. It's a good thing you're losing weight, Mr. Rishi. Those sort of things. When he finally advocated for himself, literally, truthfully speaking, he went into the GP and just lost his temper and demanded a referral test for cancer. He was actually diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer, and it took him 2 years to get to that stage. When he was diagnosed, I remember me and my mum, so my mother, English is a third language, we were taken into a room, and I was obviously a kid at this time. "Oh, I'm sorry to tell you this, Mr. Rishi. Mr. Rishi's got 6 months left to live. Here's a flyer. Go read this flyer, and we will be in touch on next steps." And that was literally it. And then, so you can imagine, I just remember looking at my mum. She obviously in bits, me overwhelmed as a 17-year-old. So I've basically used this experience to guide my career. So actually, I then found out retrospectively, I didn't know at the time, that there was a disparity issue. I didn't get what that meant at that age. My father's consultant was actually a lead PI for a phase 3 clinical trial. And I used to attend every single appointment. My father was never given that opportunity for a clinical trial. So it sent me down this sort of journey. I was like, what's going on here? So from that, I have basically learned from this. And my mission is, if I can just stop one family going through what mine went through, my day is done, my job is done. But yes, I've basically worked in loads of different aspects of healthcare, never within healthcare as an organization or within a pharmaceutical company, always on the other side. But whether I was working in a lab, I lasted about 6 months. I was terrible. So I call myself a failed scientist. But essentially, I didn't see anyone like me, even though at university we all look like me, essentially. So where's that? Where do people drop off? So that was one thing. I worked within advertising agencies, health comms. I worked in basically health literacy and all these sort of things, working with KOLs, key opinion leaders. And then I was like, hold on, they're all a certain demographic. And then, you go just fall down this little spiral, and then you're like, wow. So people say, for example, a black woman presents as a clinic with pain, she's going to get less dose than a white woman. who's in pain, because there's still these misconceptions from the era of the slavery era that people, Black women or people have higher pain thresholds. So there's so many disparities, so many things that need tackling. I set up a company who was focused on communicating with underserved communities, which went really well. I've exited that company now. But now the challenge is there's all these policies coming in, but there's no data from underserved communities, like that social determinants of health data. A little bit easier in the US. Outside the US, it's virtually non-existent. So all these solution products are all being developed without talking to the people most affected, which is underserved communities. So the journey goes on, the battle goes on. But yeah, that's my career in a nutshell. It's all been about health equity, trying to improve that in my own little way.
I mean, there's so much to unpack there. Your origin story, I mean, that's so tragic and just so unfortunately common.
Yeah, it is common. And I didn't realize that at the time. But again, as I've met more and more families, sadly, it's to this day, it's still happening. So yeah, it's sad.
Yeah. On that, can we talk about what this committee, the equity committee for PWSA, what does this look like? What does this look like at the moment? Because it's kind of at the beginning, right? Where you're just getting established. So how is that formation process? Are you setting goals at the start? Are you starting with kind of what the foundation? I'm not sure if there's a clear question there. Sorry.
It's great. And Annie, it's amazing that you wanted to do this podcast on this date, and it's before our very first meeting. So
Oh, okay.
I will say that some of this is happening in real time, right? And we're going to take it a bit organically because I'd say the formation process for me has been really thrilling because I cast like my dream team. Right. I like sat and I was like, who, if I could have anybody in the world on this team, who would I want? And I'll tell you, they all said yes. So huge thank you to Ashish, to Tracy. Like Tracy's been on my mind for over a year now in this capacity because we've had a lot of conversations along this line. Like I know she gets it. And of course, the fact that she works in this field, it's such a benefit. And I was so amazed and humbled that Stacy, as the CEO and as busy as she was the first one to step up in the meeting when we said we were forming this committee. And she said, I want to be on this committee. And then we have two other folks who aren't on the call right now, but that both work in equity and education field. So, we're looking at this holistically. There is the health aspect of this, but again, have you seen through my chart of, the PWS world of inequity? It's like it affects every aspect of the system. And so we've got to look at this from all different angles to see, okay, as an organization, how is PWSA USA bringing in more families of marginalized backgrounds? So it's not just folks of color. We're looking at the LGBTQIA community. We're looking at folks in rural places of different age ranges, single mothers, things like this. There are a lot of factors to consider. And we know that we're not meeting those needs right now. Stacy can speak more to that. And then it's about faster diagnoses. It's about getting folks more access to the healthcare that Ashish talked about, making sure they're getting all of the family programs, right? We have such rich family programs, but if they're not accessible and customized to these populations, then they're not helping them. So there's so much work to be done. And luckily, the Colors of Listening report came out where we got to hear from the community directly. So we're also going to be taking a look at that to kind of pave our way.
Yeah, and to piggyback on what Dini was saying, from a personal perspective, this work is very important to me. But from an organizational perspective, as you guys have all shared, the inequities are abstract. It's later diagnosis, it's delayed access to care, it's not having the opportunity to participate or be represented in research. Then the treatments coming out not having been tested in everyone is concerning as well. Families face different barriers based on lots of things, but the color of your skin, your race, your ethnicity, your language, what language do you speak, where you live, your socioeconomic status, your ability to navigate technology. As an organization, much of what we do is virtual. We have very few hard-copied resources anymore. So if you don't have access to the internet or a device, you don't have access to us. And as an organization, I feel strongly that without a dedicated structure and plan to address these inequities, we're inadvertently reinforcing them.
Yeah.
I'll also say, and Stacy, thank you for saying that all of that. I 100% agree. And I think also with these populations, a lot of them have experienced trauma. A lot of them have mistrust of hospitals, providers, and a lot of them might not have the ability or knowledge to advocate appropriately for themselves or for their children. And so I think, yeah, just the fact that PWSA is acknowledging this and wanting to be a part of it and wanting to improve it speaks volumes. And yeah, thank you so much.
I appreciate that you're looking that the equity committee is going to take on this holistic approach. I mean, one of the first things I remember shortly before I started working here was you had done a webinar with this man, of course, I forgot his name, but he worked advocating against the use of restraints and how kids with disabilities, kids with color were, of course, statistically more likely to receive those kinds of restraints. And I just think in all areas of this journey of having a child with a disability, there's a lot to look at. I think that there may be some families at home listening to this asking, why should I care about this? Particularly, I'm thinking particularly of white families. For those families at home who are saying, why should this committee matter to me? How does this affect the entire PWS community? How do we all benefit from this?
I'd be really interested because I bet you Ashish has some wonderful case studies of how this is true in other areas. But what I'll say is our hope for the PWS community is, first of all, we'll just be a richer community, right? We'll be bigger, we'll be stronger. And then there's also this aspect of like, who knows what we will find when we diversify research? There are so many like opportunities for innovation that diversity can bring that I truly believe this is going to be a huge boon for everybody. Not to mention the fact that I think we have a moral and have to use our consciences as to what is this organization standing for after 50 years of existing if we're not serving the entire community.
To Dini's point, if we're missing anyone, if we're not serving the whole community, we're not fulfilling our mission as an organization. And that's not okay. That's not who we want to be. It's not who we should be.
All I would add, I think Dini and Stacey have said is spot on. But I think for me, it's we as a team will need to define what diverse looks like. So when we're talking about even the white families in the population, is their socioeconomic status, there's education status. There's so many different dimensions of diversity. And if you could be in a rural area, so you may not get the same care. So it's really important that everyone is involved and supporting this initiative because I think it can really have an impact for all communities, regardless of skin color. I think.
And I'll give you this little statistic, Annie. We were looking at the global registry, which holds folks with Prader-Willi syndrome. We were looking to see how many families of color are in there compared to the US Census. And we found that amongst Asian, Black, and Indigenous families, they're only 6.4% of the global registry right now. That's the representation compared to what it should be statistically, which is 25%.
Wow.
So you're missing a huge range there. And similarly, it's a 10-point difference for the Latina community. And as a personal example, when Ione got a second diagnosis of another rare disease that she had, the first thing I wanted to do was look to see, are there any other PWS families that have this and how does it manifest? So you could be a white family and your child gets another diagnosis, some other comorbidity, and you want to know, what does this look like for other folks? So the more people we have in that registry, the better it's going to be for everyone, right? And then the other thing is, I love what Ashish brought up about like there are different aspects to our work, which is remember that everybody's kids, God willing, are going to age. So they're all going to hit that 18 plus range. And that's a huge population that we're looking at right now who's underserved. So, there are not enough residential homes for our population. There's not enough services. So if we're going to do something to meet those needs, it's going to help everyone eventually.
Feel like I want to acknowledge that was like such a white question to ask. How is this equity? Like, like of course and you've already said it, Teeny, like socioeconomic, the rural living. Anyway, so
I think it was a great question to ask, Annie, because we've all heard it when we talk about wanting to expand this work and why it's important. I think every one of us have been asked, why is that, or how is that going to benefit me?
Also, if I could just add, I think asking those uncomfortable questions is actually a good thing because we're creating that safe space. And I think that's really important as well.
All
I
right,
would
thank
just
you.
add to that because I think that is such an important point that Ashish brings up. And I think that's part of the problem right now is that so many folks in this country, if you're white and you may not be surrounded by many people of color, you have so much fear of saying the wrong thing, the wrong word, and all of a sudden getting painted as racist. Maybe you're going to get canceled. Like there's just so much fear that exists around this topic right now. And I think last time we wrote in the notes some good resources for folks to read and start listening to get more comfortable with this. But, I really just want to encourage folks that, yeah, we're all going to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. My kids are always correcting me. They're like, no, that person is a they. And I'm so sorry. But we don't know until we try and we make the mistake and then we get better, right? So just like anything else, as we tell our kids to learn how to ride a bike, it's the same thing about having these conversations.
Yeah, I think if you didn't ask that question, we wouldn't be able to have what we just talked about and explore this. And I feel like what Stacy said is like people are asking and thinking about this. So I'm glad that you asked.
I also
Good.
think having the hard conversations, asking the hard questions, and then answering them is a form of kindness and respect. But it gets viewed as, will I be disrespectful by asking? And
Mhm.
I really see it differently than that. I think it's really important to talk about it. I've had many conversations with Dini over the years about this, and it's where I found my own biases that I didn't know were there, was through exploring some of the hard questions. So I think it's good and that we need to do it more as a community.
And I still love you.
Right back at you.
Yeah, I think at the heart of it, it's more like curiosity. Like you're curious, you want to know more, you want to learn. And I think that like looking at the intention behind the questions and how it's asked is a huge part of it.
That's such an important point, Tracy, right? Because I think we have all been in the situation too, where all of a sudden it like falls to the folks who are most marginalized that like, oh, now I have to be your educator. Now I have to teach you. And so I think it's important that when you want to have these conversations, you get permission from the person of like, do you want to have this conversation with me? Do you want to have it right now? And like maybe invest in some of your own education too, so you're not putting so much on them.
That's a great point, too. One of the questions that we wanted to ask, but I don't know that you can answer this yet because if you're just about to have your first meeting, have you set any like initial goals or do you have any idea of your initial steps forward? Do you have any response to that or is it just too early?
I love it. Stacy is like, we got it. We got it. Okay, Stacy, what are you going to say? What came to your mind first?
Well, the first thing I thought was we have lots of goals. And I think that what we're going to find in our first couple meetings is we might be a little too ambitious with our goals right now, and that we're going to need to prioritize first. But I'd say one of the first things that we're going to be looking at and trying to get more accurate is our data. We don't know who we're missing if we don't know who we have. And our current data is very poor. We didn't start collecting things like ethnicity and race until just a couple of years ago. So anyone before that, it's listed as unknown. And we have 68,000 records. It's a lot of unknown data to go through. And that doesn't even talk about any of the other areas that we want to be looking at. I mean, certainly from the 18 and up group, we have an age for the person with PWS. We can pull data from that. We can pull geographic data as long as people who have moved have updated their information with us. If not, again, it's outdated data. So I think that's one of my personal goals is to have that cleaned up so that we know and have a spot to start from when it comes to looking at, are we making any progress? And even connecting and finding people right now.
Ashish, we're talking about data. I feel like we have to go to you.
Yeah, I think in terms of where my goals would be is just to sort of support PWS with, the landscape analysis, I think is probably the important thing. I think the little bit that I've spoken to Dini and Stacy about is I think we need to really look at what the issue is within the US and where pockets of people are. And yeah, so it's generating that data. And then, you can almost complement that with the data that Stacey's talking about. And then you have this richer baseline that we can then say, okay, we need to improve this and this and this by 27, 28, 2028, whatever that looks like. But it comes with that baseline, I think.
So I guess a personal goal of mine would be, and I saw this in the meeting agenda, is to start including people from different populations and demographics, and really hear what their experiences have been, what would be helpful, really bringing them to the forefront and trying to include them more in decision making. I think that is going to be really important to be able to include those people.
Thank you for bringing that up because, folks will look at this committee and say like, well, I'm not represented there or something's not represented. And we're aware of that. That's part of the problem, right, that we're starting with. So one of the ways we're hoping to bridge that is by doing exactly what Tracy's saying, bringing in folks to the different meetings and having, like maybe it's a dad's group that presents, maybe it's a group of folks that are living in rural places, different populations of people that we don't always hear as much from who are underrepresented so that we can find, because right, our first objective is just to do what everybody's saying. We just have to like figure out where we are, where the biggest gaps are, and then craft our path forward. And also, I'm a big fan of the like come up with like two small wins, like really good, actionable, juicy things that we can say, like, here, we did this, and like make everyone feel good that there's also progress. It's not just like, are we searching and figuring out the pulse, but like, are we also moving forward?
And I think that just as you were talking, I was thinking about one of the obstacles, we can say like we want to represent people, we want people here, but if sometimes the struggle is accessing them or finding them to even let them know that you want them here. And that's something that Carrie and I in communications have come up against. We've wanted to represent different communities, but if you don't know them, you don't know them. And how do you reach them? And so, do you have any kind of plan for that? Or I mean, maybe this podcast can
Yes.
help? Like, do you wanna put a call out?
I certainly hope so. So we want to hear from you, right? Like if you feel like you don't see yourself represented in the leadership, in the programs and things like that, we want to hear from you. So absolutely. And I hope you'll link to some, our email address in the show notes. We also have to make our organization more inclusive. I heard somebody recently talking about how an invitation to bring in people without thinking about their needs and how to make it a safe space for them is actually just more violence and it's more performative. So I think I remember seeing call outs to say, like, oh, we want more representation of people of color in our photos. And I was kind of like, and this wasn't even this organization, another one, but I said, I don't want to just give you my photo because then it makes it look like you're doing more work than you actually are.
Mm.
Right. So I think that one of the wonderful outputs of the work we're doing to really invest in creating value for these communities and people is that then they'll want to show up more. Right. They'll say, like, yeah, this is a place for me.
I think one of the other ways, and like Annie, you mentioned, I think we've struggled with this for as long as I've been here. And I've been here almost 10 years. So this has certainly been an issue for us as an organization. But just 2 weeks ago, last week, was the Florida chapter held an event in Miami at the zoo. And Sarah on our staff went and served as a Spanish translator. And two families came who were Spanish speaking who had had no contact with any PWS organization previously. That's the kind of boots on the ground stuff that I think we need to build in as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Stacey, because my mind immediately goes to like language, because I feel like if we can get the data and determine, how many people's primary language is not English and try to offer resources like things in different languages, and have maybe interpreter services or for people to call into the hotline. If we can provide something like that, that would provide so much more access to people who normally wouldn't call in or go on the website or, do any of that.
That's a great segue for me to put in a little plug that that's exactly what we are doing. So we are in the process of translating everything we have to Spanish. We're going to just automatically do Spanish, Arabic, and French off the bat for everything that we have while we collect the data that can then direct our efforts. But we're also exploring having that translator option when somebody calls into us, where you can choose what language and an interpreter will be available to interpret those calls, especially for the crisis calls.
And we did just start a Spanish-speaking Facebook group,
Yes.
which it's not a lot of activity in there, but just trying to create a space for families to be able to talk about these things. And Sarah's a moderator of that. And yes, it is all so important. And that's one of the things I love about working here is seeing how the many ways that we're trying to bridge these gaps. And I think this equity committee is an incredible step in that process. Well, I would love to talk about the launch of this committee. I know that there is a big event that's coming up to kind of support the launch of this. So if you would like to talk about that, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of these programs that we want to do cost money. And so PWSA USA has created an equity fund in order to, just be dedicated to this work. There'll be lots of ways the whole organization does it, but we also need some focus at this level. And so we are doing a kickoff event, a fabulous dinner at Rasika, which is, one of the world's best Indian restaurants here in DC. And we have the chef doing a 6-course tasting menu. And, my background is in wine. So Anish of Soleno and I are both kind of hosting the wine end. We paired each of the courses with some magnificent wines. And it's going to be an event not to be missed. It's incredible. And all the proceeds will go towards helping this fund.
I love that.
I lived in DC.
You have to come. And on Sencha, we will toast you, Tracy and Ashish. But Ashish, you should come. You're close enough.
Yeah.
I'll be there. But that sounded amazing, so I'll be there. Yeah.
Well, and it's going to be when?
Thank you, Stacy. Detailed. So the event will be on Saturday night, April 25th. There are still limited number of tickets available. So if you want to come, let us know right away and get your tickets. And yeah, it's going to be a fabulous night.
And I would just add for our listeners who want to support this work but are unable to come to the event, you can still do that through donations to us directly and then indicate in your donation that you want it for the equity work. Or you can also do it through the event page. There is an option to just make a donation as well, and then it will be funneled immediately to the equity fund.
Exactly. And I love the name that we came up for the event. It's Solidarity and Spice.
Love it. I love it. And the page is beautiful. It has such a nice feel. So I encourage people to check it out, even if you don't plan on coming, because it's just very cool.
Stacey, I had one question for you, but maybe you kind of answered it about just how you see this committee shifting or enhancing the work that PWSA does.
I think what's going to happen and what should happen is that this work flows through every decision that we make, everything that we do. I don't want the equity work to be viewed as a separate siloed project, that it really does need to be a forethought in everything that we do, every policy we create, every program that we create, every conversation we have with a family, we need to be thinking from that perspective. And then I think we also need to be looking at what data are we tracking and why are we tracking it and how is it being used? And then share that differently than we have in the past as well. So I think there's a thought that we make decisions behind closed doors as a group of powerful people, and that's just now the direction. And I really, although I don't believe that that's completely true, I do want our data to help support those decisions we make. And that data needs to include all of the equity areas and barriers that we've been talking about.
just given everything that's happening in our country, just with the data that's being collected, is it private? Is it going to be shared at any point? I feel like there could be some anxieties around that.
One of the things that we are finding right now, as we try to collect ethnicity and race data, we are getting a big increase in people selecting the option that they prefer not to answer that question right now. And that's understandable given what's happening. We'll never share identified data. What I would like to share is the de-identified data in terms of percentages so that we have a better idea of who our community is and who we're still missing. And I think race and ethnicity is easier to capture than some of the things like socioeconomic status, access to the internet or devices, and geographic areas. So will get the geographic area when they put in their address, but we have very, very few people in our system living in rural areas, but statistically they must exist, which tells me we're not capturing them. And I'm not sure if we're not capturing them just because of where they live or if there's other disparities in place.
Thank you for answering that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's a great question, Tracy, because I think that is something that a lot of people are very concerned about. And Dini, to something you said about we have to go beyond just asking for this representation and why are we asking for it and how are we keeping it safe, keeping it intentional. Just made me think about when Carrie and I wanted to share stories of families from the LGBTQ plus community and we just put a call out and like without really thought so much as to like, what are we going to do with this? What is the intention and how is it going to be received and all of that? And of course, someone responded. I get it. But
Say that's a perfect tee up to a wonderful gift that Ashish is giving our community, which is that he has a training. And I was trying to, Ashish, look up the name. You had told me at one point what the name of your training is, but he is going to facilitate some of his training for the board and for the staff and things like that. And I think that will help us.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you. So essentially, I deliver a training called cultural safety. So it actually ties back to your question, Anne, earlier on was, you felt uncomfortable asking that question. But in a safe environment, you can ask that question. So I think cultural competency training isn't enough. It needs to go a step beyond. So that's why I do. I tackle that.
well, I'm looking forward to that training. So as we wrap this up, I just want to say I'm very grateful to you all for being here. I'm very excited to see the work that is going to come from this. What is something that families can take from this? What is maybe something that families at home listening, what's a step they can take to support this initiative or just to support the presence of equity in the PWS community? What's a good first step for families?
I'll tell you the most basic one that my daughter's kindergarten teacher told me, and I repeat this all the time. If you see somebody who looks different than you, if you see somebody who's in the minority in any group, anywhere, say hello. You know, it's like a really simple thing, but like, how can you invite them in? How can you, given all of this information and this background context we've given you, know what it feels like to be that person? And, go a little bit out of your way to make sure that they feel welcome. And also, if you're talking to folks and you hear people saying, like, I don't understand why we need an equity committee, or I don't understand why we need these programs, tell them what you learned, tell them to give a listen.
And I would say, I think it's really important that we do some of our own personal work. So, this is where it's important to me as a person, certainly important to me as a leader of this organization, but as a person, I think it's important that I continue to do my own homework and unpack the biases and learn the things that I don't know, the history that I don't know, because those things shape us, whether we realize that's happening or not. And it's not okay to expect the marginalized communities to be the ones to constantly be educating us about those things. There's an ownership that we need to take on our own to do that. And that's easy to do. And we can link some of those resources in the show notes for people to do them.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know Harvard has a really good link or site that you can go to, and they have a bunch of implicit bias tests that you can take. And I also think, like, for me, I would say just practicing kind of along the lines of what Dini said, just empathy and kindness for others, just trying to imagine what experiences are like for people who are different than you, and that, just because you're not directly affected doesn't mean that it will not eventually affect you in some way. And you don't need to be directly affected to care.
If I could just add, I think it's just advocating. It's advocating for your own family, but also if you could, share your experiences. There may be that family that's isolated somewhere that could just hear it if it's on social media, for example, and they will feel seen. I think that's really important that we can help as many families as possible to feel seen and heard. And obviously the aim will always be to make sure that their voice is counted. But these are what I would hope people get out of this. And share this podcast. I think the more it's shared, the more people will be aware of the challenges that people are facing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of PWS United. If you want to learn more about Prader-Willi syndrome and how PWSA USA is making strides in advocacy, family support, and research, visit www.pwsausa.org. And while you're there, we encourage you to sign up for our Pulse email newsletter to stay informed about the latest news, resources, and events. Don't forget to subscribe to the PWS United podcast so you never miss an episode. Our team is always available to support families and their loved ones living with PWS 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You can call us at 941-312-0400 or email info@pwsausa.org. Catch a new episode next Tuesday, and until then, have a great week.